Joining us on the line is Seth Dillon, CEO of Babylon Bee, and Kristen Waggoner, President and CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom. The Babylon Bee has filed a lawsuit against the state of California. So, Seth, tell me about this lawsuit.
Well, I wish we didn't have to file lawsuits to defend our right to tell jokes, but unfortunately, this is where we're at. Gavin Newsom has been wanting to crack down on speech he doesn't like, jokes he doesn't like. He saw a viral video that was mocking Kamala Harris. It was like this AI-generated, kind of deep fake parody thing. And he commented on that immediately. This was a few months ago. He commented on this and said that, this kind of thing should be illegal. And so I guess there was already a bill that was in the works that they kind of accelerated to get pushed through that would make this unlawful right around election time, making parodies like this. Definitely seems politically motivated to me, but it affects the Babylon Bee and our ability to do satire. So we've retained the services of ADF. Thankfully, they fight for freedom, and they're here to help us push back on this.
So, Kristen, on a legal basis, the claim by California presumably is that they're just trying to crack down on actual misuse of face, and that when it comes to some forms of informational usage, that those could theoretically violate the law in terms of fraud. What's the problem with how they drew this law or are trying to draw these regulations?
Well, they're claiming they have an interest in the fair elections, but yet what they're doing is using a sledgehammer to essentially crush the First Amendment rights of all Americans in the process, including making jokes illegal. There are a couple of different statutes that are in place in California. The first one that the lawsuit is focused at is where California is saying that if there's any type of materially deceptive content, and of course, California gets to decide what that is, that content, if it could potentially harm a political candidate's chances of getting elected, it's illegal. And it's not just the candidate that can sue, it's anybody, including you can be sued if you repost this information. So it's just a roadmap for censorship, and it's a blatant violation of the First Amendment.
So, Seth, one of the things that they're apparently trying to do is suggest that you must label satire or parody as satire or parody. Apparently, people are too stupid to recognize otherwise. As a professional joke-making human, what does it mean if you would have to label everything that you do a satire or a parody?
Well, we've kind of wrestled with this for a long time because, as you know, the Babylon Bee's been fact-checked many times over the years. We've been accused of trafficking and misinformation under the guise of satire. That's what the New York Times said a few years back. And so there's always been this suggestion that we're misleading people on purpose, that we need to do more to make people aware of the fact that we're publishing satire. But it really does ruin the joke when you put a massive disclaimer. I think the requirement, Kristen can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the requirement in this law is that the disclaimer be at least as large as the largest font that's in the actual, article or parody itself. And so if we have a headline that's got very large font, we need to have a disclaimer that's equally as big or bigger than the headline itself. It completely ruins the joke, and we're not willing to do that. So we're going to continue to have to violate the law, which then puts our business in jeopardy, because if we get sued repeatedly by state officials for violating this law, it could potentially bankrupt us and put us out of business if we're covering all their legal fees. So and so then we have the decisions that we have to make. Well, do we want to publish these particular jokes because we could have these enforcement actions? That chills speech, because then we're going to be withholding content that we would otherwise publish if not for these laws and their penalties.
So, Kristen, you mentioned that California here is trying to basically, kill a fly with a sledgehammer. What would a more calculated approach look like to stop people from disseminating, say, a deep fake of you that wasn't satire or parody? It was just you saying that you full-scale endorse abortion on demand and the transing of children or something. How could that be stopped? Should the government step in those circumstances?
Well, in a number of instances, there are already laws in place to do that. Whether they're election fraud laws that really are actually interfering in elections, whether it's defamation and there's actual harm to a reputation, we already have laws in place to deal with these types of issues. Adding this law, especially when it's impacting core political debate, is really just an attempt for the government to be able to put its thumb on the scale of speech that it likes. It's content discrimination because it's focusing on the subjects like political debate. This law only applies to candidates, as an example, or elected officials. And it's viewpoint discrimination as well, in that if a candidate or someone wants to post something, for example, that is positive about a candidate but untrue, the law doesn't apply to that. And so there's just no way that this law is consistent with the First Amendment because of how it's being applied. It's also very vague in its definitions. I mean, the last person we want to decide what's true or false in our political debate is Gavin Newsom. And that's essentially what it's allowing California officials to do. It will have a nationwide effect because actually you can get sued, I can get sued as a private citizen for just reposting something that the Babylon Bee puts out there.
Now, Seth, do you ever find it puzzling that you've become the center of so much firestorm over the course of the creation of the Babylon Bee? It really is kind of amazing how the Babylon Bee has, I would say, quasi-inadvertently changed the world in ways that you guys probably didn't intend. I mean, if it had not been for the Babylon Bee becoming apparently the focal point of every bit of left-wing ire, then probably Elon Musk doesn't buy X, which obviously changes the direction of free speech in the country. Do you ever sit there at night and just wonder why it is that this thing that started as a fairly small satire site and that has now grown into a successful business, that has changed the nature of free speech in the country so much and the debate around it?
It's definitely not something we ever expected. We literally did just set out to tell jokes on the internet, try to make people laugh, be entertaining, speak truth to a post-truth culture using humor. Did not expect to be on the front lines of a battle for free speech in the public square. But it's where we find ourselves because there's so much opposition to the First Amendment and what the First Amendment protects. And you see it happening all over the place. There's op-eds being written about how maybe it's time to do away with the Constitution. You had John Kerry just the other day talking about how the First Amendment is I think the word he used was roadblock. It's a roadblock right now. It's in our way. It means that we can't decide what's true for everyone, which is what we need to do in order to retain our power and whatever. And that is just, thank God for that roadblock. Thank God that we actually have that roadblock preventing these tyrants from deciding what's true and what jokes we're allowed to tell.
So, Kristen, what is the next step for the lawsuit? Where are you filing this thing?
The lawsuit's already been filed. We're waiting for a judge to be assigned. I think you can also expect that a preliminary injunction will be requested, as well a permanent injunction to stop the law from going into effect, both on a temporary basis and then a long-term basis. It's very telling that this law went into effect immediately upon Newsom's signature, so that it's supposed to affect this election cycle. And I think it's just important to point out that when we allow the government to use code words like misinformation or disinformation, that is state-sponsored censorship, and that blurs the lines between democracy and dictatorship.
That's Kristen Waggoner of Alliance Defending Freedom, always doing amazing work on the legal side. And of course, Seth Dillon, CEO of Babylon Bee, the funniest site in America, doing yeoman's work in making you laugh and also pointing out the stupidity of a lot of bad ideas. Seth and Kristen, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.